Distinguished colleagues, when we last gathered in this chamber, the President of the Council, the Ambassador of Germany, asked me to explain how Israel implements international law, specifically with regard to the Jewish communities of Judea and Samaria. Today, I will provide the answers. But before we discuss international law, we must understand the context and facts. Today, I will present to you the 4 pillars that prove the case for Jewish ownership of the land of Israel. The first pillar is the Bible. The Jewish people's rightful ownership of Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, is well documented throughout the Old Testament and beyond. The second pillar is history. The Jewish claim to the land of Israel is confirmed time and again, not just with Jewish history, but with the history of the world. The third pillar is a legal claim. Our rights to the land are codified in international law, including in the documents that founded this very body. And the fourth pillar is the pursuit of international peace and security. A stronger and safer Israel means a stronger and safer world. It is through these 4 pillars, Mr. President, that I will provide you with the answers to your questions. Let us discuss our first pillar of proof, the Bible. The Jewish people's right to the land of Israel is mentioned over a dozen times in the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, which includes the Torah, the Old Testament, the prophets, and the writings. In the book of Genesis, the very first book of the Old Testament, God says to Abraham, and I will read that in Hebrew, והקמתי את בריתי ביני ובינך ובין זרעך אחריך לדורותם לברית עולם, להיות לך לאלוהים ולזרעך אחריך, ונתתי לך ולזרעך אחריך את ארץ מגוריך, את כל ארץ כנען, לאחוזת עולם, והייתי להם לאלוהים. And I will now read the translation in English. And I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you, throughout their generations, for an everlasting covenant. And I will give to you and to your descendants after you all the land of Canaan for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. This is a deed to our land. From the book of Genesis to the Jewish exodus from Egypt, to receiving the Torah on Mount Sinai, and to the realization of God's covenant in the Holy Land of Israel, the Bible paints a consistent picture. The entire history of our people and our connection to Eretz Israel begins right here. It is not just the Hebrew Bible or the 15 million Jews worldwide that accepts this right. It is accepted across all 3 monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The Quran itself accepts the divine deed of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. Mr. President, the second pillar is the history of the land of Israel and the Jewish people over the past 2 millennia. The Jewish kingdom in Eretz Israel comprised 12 tribes. The largest of those tribes, the tribe of Judah, lived in the area now known as Judea. You all know the words Jew and Jewish. Jew and Jewish come from Judea. This was the kingdom over which King David and King Solomon ruled. It was a kingdom with Jerusalem as its capital. It was home to the first temple, destroyed by the Babylonians in the year 5087 BCE, and the second temple destroyed by the Romans in the year 70 CE. When the Romans destroyed the Jewish kingdom, they sent our people into the 2,000-year exile that kept most of us, not all of us, from our land. Even the Romans themselves admitted the land was ours. Those of you who visited Rome may recall that Emperor Titus famously commemorated his victory and the Jewish explosion by building an enormous arch on the Via Sacra in Rome. If you look in the arch, it includes an illustration of his men carrying away the menorah from the Jewish temple. But even though the Romans knew that the land was ours and we belonged in it, they attempted to erase our age-old connection to the land by renaming it Syria Palestina. Why Palestina? They attributed it as a southern province of the Syrian Empire. This is how the narrow strip of land in Eretz Israel, nestled between Egypt in the south and Lebanon in the north, came to be called Palestine. For the next 2,000 years, the land of Israel was conquered by the Crusaders, followed by the Ottoman Empire. But despite centuries of wars and conquests, the Jewish people never left. A Jewish community remained in Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, throughout this entire time. Although most of our community was forced into exile by the Roman Empire, we knew that someday we would return to our ancient homeland. For 2 millennia, Jews across the world continued to pray 3 times every day for our long-awaited return home to Zion, to Jerusalem. As we just said on Passover last week, as we do every year, next year in Jerusalem. Mr. President, if the Jewish people's deep and ancient roots in the land of Israel are not sufficient proof, let us consider international law, the third pillar. In 1917, Lord Balfour, Britain's Foreign Secretary, issued a statement of British support for the establishment of, and I quote, a national home for the Jewish people. The Balfour Declaration designated this national homeland in Eretz Israel. The Balfour Declaration also, in its own words, specifically endorsed the Zionist cause. As Lord Balfour wrote, and I quote, I have much pleasure in conveying to you on behalf of His Majesty's government the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the Cabinet. After the Ottoman Empire surrendered in World War I, the British took legal ownership over the land of Israel. With that legal ownership, they were able to issue the Balfour Declaration and commit to helping establish a national home for the Jewish people in our historic homeland. In 1922, the mandate of the League of Nations not only states its support for the establishment of a Jewish national home, it encouraged and facilitated the return of Jews in the diaspora to our homeland. It confirms, and I quote, the historical connection of the Jewish people with Palestine and to the grounds for reconstituting their national home in that country. These documents are Zionist documents. By definition, Zionism is a realization of the right of the Jewish people to self-determination and sovereignty in the land of Israel. That is what Zionism means, no more, no less. It appears in international law in essence and word for word. In 1945, the UN Charter was adopted, drafted in the wake of the Holocaust. It guarantees the right of peoples to exercise self-determination. It also refers to, and I quote, the inherent right of individual or collective self-defense if an armed attack occurs against a member of the UN. One people's pursuit of self-determination could not undermine the safety and security of another nation. 2 years later, the UN Partition Plan called for the establishment of a Jewish state and an Arab state in the land of Israel. What we did, we accepted it, but the Palestinians did not. Instead of peace, they chose war and opened fire on the Jews. our small, tiny, newly declared nation was suddenly under attack in 1948. On the last day of the British Mandate, Israel declared independence and immediately was attacked by 5 Arab armies that joined the Palestinians, hoping to destroy it. Israel won that war, and the hope and future of the Jewish people was saved. But the war of 1948 did not end with peace. It ended with armistice agreements between Israel and its neighbors. The armistice lines between Israel and Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon were never considered international borders. They were simply lines designating the end of the first battle in the Arab war against Israel. Jordan maintained control of Judea and Samaria, and Egypt controlled the Gaza Strip. These agreements were formed in the absence of permanent peace treaties, which would only be signed decades later. Mr. President, it was the Arabs who insisted that the armistice lines would not be permanent borders. As stated in the Jordanian-Israeli Agreement of 1949, these lines, and I quote, are agreed upon by the parties without prejudice to future territorial settlements or boundary lines. Because these lines are not borders, the Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria to this day do not cross any international borders. They are built on strategic land for Israel's security, and as agreed by the parties in the Oslo Accords, would be classified as final status issues. Mr. President, to support the right of Israel to exist in our homeland is therefore essential to international peace and security, the final pillar. For decades, many Arab leaders have chosen the sword over the olive branch, long before even one of these so-called settlements was established. You know when the PLO was established, the Palestinian Liberation Organization? In 1964, 3 years before 1967. How it make any sense? What they need to liberate before 1967? And in 1964, not a single settlement existed in Judea and Samaria, and our right to exist was still rejected. To blame the Jewish communities of Judea and Samaria for the lack of peace between Israelis and Palestinians would be a deliberate oversight of history at best. The Arabs rejected opportunities for peace time and again. The 1937 Peel Commission report, the Arabs rejected it. The 1947 UN partition plan, rejected. The 1948 Israeli offer for truce, rejected. The 2000 Camp David summit, rejected. The 2001 Taba summit, rejected. The 2007 Annapolis conference, rejected. The 2008 offer of Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, we are still waiting for an answer on that. The 2014 Secretary of State Kerry's peace initiative, Abbas chose Hamas. And today, in the upcoming US peace plan, the Palestinians say it is dead on arrival. Mr. President, it weakens the mandate of this body, which is tasked with making our world more peaceful and secure, to continue blaming the side that offers solutions and reward the side that rejects them. It is dangerous to praise the side that encourages hatred and bankrolls terrorism. Palestinian rejectionism is chronic. Palestinian leaders refuse to acknowledge the right of the Jewish people to self-determination in the land of Israel and insist on returning to the land in droves. This behavior directly contradicts all 4 pillars of the past and keeps us locked from forging peace in the future. There should be no reward for rejectionism. There should be no prize for aggression. Mr. President, Real peace will be possible when the four pillars of the past are accepted and realized. But real peace will come when the four pillars of the future are put into action. These are the four pillars of the future. First, the Palestinians must accept and recognize the Jewish state of Israel. No Palestinian leader has ever said those words. Second, the Palestinians must end their campaign of incitement. Enough is enough. How can the international community expect us to make any concessions to a leader who pays his people to kill ours? Third, regional cooperation. We are already working together with many of our neighbors on security, on common goals, and on building relations. We want these relationships to flourish and present themselves in the open. And fourth, we will never do or agree to anything that compromises our security. We want a peaceful future with our neighbors, but our security is non-negotiable, and we will decide where to draw the line. Mr. President, we are ready to work together. We are ready to talk, and we are ready to create a better future for our children. It is only when the four pillars of the past and the four pillars of the future are accepted that peace will come. Thank you.